Thanks so much for having me. My name is Chris Naso. I'm a legislative aide to Berkeley Councilmember Kate Harrison. Been working for her for about 2 years. Just to be clear, nothing I'm about to say should be construed as legal advice. I'm not an attorney. Please consult with your city attorneys. So yeah, as you've probably heard, just last week, the city of Berkeley passed the first natural gas ban in the country for new buildings. Yeah. So in a mere 5 months, it will be illegal to use gas in new buildings, but for very limited exceptions, for specific systems where it's impossible to build a project without gas under the current state regulatory framework, or where it's found to be in the public interest to permit projects with limited gas infrastructure. And so Sean asked me to address some of the legal foundations for this ordinance in hopes that other cities can follow. And I think in order to give some context here for the legal underpinnings, I think it's important to briefly touch on 2 different approaches to decarbonizing on-site fossil fuel usage. And I think these 2 approaches can be seen through a framework of 2 different emergencies. And so the first one is obviously the climate emergency. This is the emergency of our current age. It's an existential climate crisis. We're now at a point where scores of children are walking out of their schools on strike. We've got kids occupying Dianne Feinstein's Senate office. We've got kids joining political organizations with dystopian names like Youth versus the Apocalypse. And we've got the Extinction Rebellion. So yeah, kids have a tendency to see the forest from the trees, such as the fact that we're living through right now the 6th great extinction, which may very well include our own species if we don't act right now. So as you've probably seen, the UN IPCC report said that we need far-reaching, rapid, and unprecedented changes across all of society. And we only have 10 years to do it. And so across California, natural gas, on-site combustion natural gas is about 15% of total GHGs in the state. And in Berkeley, it's more than 27%, because we know that that doesn't include the methane leaks. So, I mean, it's just absolutely critical that we get a handle on this. The second crisis or emergency is obviously the 1970s energy crisis. And it was during this period that the CEC was established under the Warren-Alquist State Energy Resources Conservation Act of 1974. And, essentially, they were tasked with reducing, wasteful, uneconomic, inefficient, unnecessary consumption of energy. And so their aim as an agency is essentially to do cost-effective and energy-efficient building design. And I mean, that's great, right? But I don't know if that's the right approach necessarily to fully decarbonize our buildings. So So I just want to make a disclaimer. I don't want to be laughed out of the room. I'm fully in support of energy efficiency. I know that's a big part of your guys' jobs, and I firmly believe in the CEC's mission. And I'm very sympathetic to the fact that they weren't initially designed as a decarbonization agency, even though they've kind of been tasked with that now. Nonetheless, we have to realize that this is the framework we have, and we need to look for others as well. So just a little bit about the current framework with energy efficiency and decarbonization. So energy efficiency is really important, but it can only indirectly lower carbon from fossil fuel combustion. In addition, the CEC's TDV, time dependent value, vastly undervalues the social cost of carbon. You can see this graph right here. They're basically using the cap and trade prices, and right now the cost of carbon is at $18, which is so low. It also doesn't take into consideration seismic costs, health costs, stranded asset costs. And then on top of that, the CEC's regulations pretty much favor fossil fuel over all electric design. There's alternative costs of carbon out there. The Obama administration had a $37 per metric ton back in 2015, right? The CEC's at 18 right now. I've seen it as high as 900, 1,000. Obviously, life is priceless, so I don't know how high it really should be. Okay, so the current default approach to building decarbonization for on-site fossil fuel usage has been through REACH codes. So I'm totally in support of REACH codes, and our city, the city of Berkeley, is going to be going forward with them. But there are some, disadvantages to them. So I don't think that they should be the only approach that cities take. So first of all, you have to ask permission to the CEC. Typically, they only incentivize going all electric, which is great, but it's not the same as saying no more fossil fuel usage. However, I have seen like the city of Carlsbad has used a REACH code to require heat pumps. But Title 24 is really complicated, so writing a REACH code is difficult. You have to submit it to the CEC, you have to do a cost effectiveness study, you have to prove to the CEC that you're enhancing efficiency. So this is all, it's doable, but it's complicated. No offense to TRC, but there's expensive consultant costs involved. Fortunately, in the Bay Area, we're working with a bunch of other cities, so we're spreading those costs out. The CEC does not regulate gas stoves, so you can't attack gas stoves through an energy REACH code. You need something else. And developers can still use gas if there's enough market demand, right? They're just going to pay more. So I think a different approach potentially is to ban fossil fuel in new buildings and have energy efficiency. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking in Berkeley right now. So the key legal underpinning here is that cities still retain sovereignty in key areas. So basically, the United States Constitution, the state constitution, there's like layered sovereignty. And it turns out under the state constitution that cities have all this power as long as it's not in conflict with the laws at the higher levels. And that includes the ability to, promote health, safety, and welfare. And so I included this picture here of Thomas Hobbes. He's an English philosopher. He wrote a lot about sovereignty. He's a very paranoid guy. He famously wrote that, without sovereignty, without a strong sovereign, a king, a government, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. And so I think it's kind of, he kind of suggested that, I don't know if you can see up there, but that's a king with like armor, and the armor is made up of like thousands and millions of his fellow countrymen. And that's basically showing that if people come together, give up some of their rights and give it to the government to help regulate for the general welfare of all, we're all stronger because of it. He was looking through the English Civil War at the time, and we're living through a climate crisis right now, and I think it's kind of instructive. So, all right, so I don't know if you've seen those ads on the internet, one weird trick. Yeah, so there are a couple of tricks that are not good ones. So like the first one we thought about was, can you prohibit gas appliances? And it turns out, I mean, potentially you could, but you'd have to do an energy REACH code, and you might get into certain federal preemption issues. So that's not a really good way to go. You could require all electric design. That would also require an energy REACH code working with the CEC. It's pretty complicated. You could prohibit gas service and lateral pipes. However, you would trigger the CPUC's jurisdiction, and I don't think PG&E would be too happy about that. So that's pretty complicated. And then number 4, ding, 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 is prohibit internal gas piping. So you prohibit, cities have the ability to prohibit the piping from the meter to each of the different appliances. And that's exactly the approach that Berkeley took. So basically, if your city is interested in this, the first step that we took was to draft a number of findings to just explain our purpose for doing it. And this is really important in a legal context. The first one was the climate impacts. So, we have sea level rise because we're a coastal city, or we're on the bay. We have fire risks, we have extreme heat risks, we have drought risks, flooding. We have geologic risks as well related to natural gas because we are on the Hayward Fault, and basically the USGS showed there are going to be 450 major fires during the big one. Lots of death, lots of property loss, lots of fires. There are health and safety impacts from burning fossil fuel in your building, asthma, nitrogen dioxide, formaldehyde, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of economic impacts, which I won't go into, which are positive from switching from gas to electric. And then it's also important to tie your ordinance back to the various policy underpinnings that already exist in your city. So you might have a climate action plan, you might have a climate emergency declaration, a fossil-free resolution, or various other things that your city has done. So that also helps to bolster it. Second of all, you want to determine the applicability. So do you want to have this ban start during the building permit process or at entitlement? Initially, we tried to do the building permit process, but we were convinced to switch it to entitlement for political reasons and feasibility reasons. You also want to make sure that you want to reassure the CEC and other state agencies that you're not impinging on their jurisdiction. So that's really important. You want to define what a new building is, and that was actually pretty simple because the existing building code already does that. And then there's the definition of gas infrastructure, which we kind of just took from the plumbing and mechanical code. So that was easy. And then this is the fun part. This is like where we actually prohibited natural gas. We took a systems approach instead of the availability of a CEC baseline. We're basically banning all natural gas infrastructure in new buildings, except if you can't model a certain system currently under the CEC process. So an example of that would be the central heat pump hot water systems. However, the CEC commissioners have pretty much said that they're going to get it done by the first quarter of 2020, if not sooner, which is really encouraging. And so if you do get an exception, you still have to be electric ready, which is, I mean, it's great, but it's going to be a huge burden, so you might as well just go all electric from the beginning. That's kind of the thinking. But also because we know that doing retrofits 50 years or 100 years down the line is going to be way more expensive than having the capacity, the wiring, the conduit installed at day one. And then on top of that, if you get an exception for, let's say, the central hot water heating system, you can't extend that infrastructure to any other appliance in the building, which is really important. So you only get that exception for that one device. And then we've got a public interest exemption so that developers can come. So like, let's say you're building a lab. I understand that labs can be all electric, which is really awesome. But let's say that there's some kind of process or industrial process that cannot be electrified at this time. This entity could come to the city and prove to the city that it's in the public interest to exempt this use. And that would be appealable to the full council in many instances. And this kind of brings democracy into the process of decarbonization, which is really exciting. And then once again, if you get this exemption, you still have to be all electric ready, and you can't use gas for anything else except for that system. And then once you have drafted your ordinance and passed it, you submit your ordinance to the California Building Standards Commission, and it's a simple informational filing, unlike with an energy reach code where you have to prove various things to the CEC. There's, as far as I can tell, there's no approval. It's just an informational filing. And then we recommend passing a backup reach code to further incentivize all electric design for projects that are exempted from the ordinance, and for the various reasons that Sarah explained. Our sustainability director calls this the belt and suspenders approach, which I think is a pretty neat way of thinking of it. And yeah, I mean, that's it. Thank you so much.